get on the mic here and deliver a little bit of a European wrap as we head 1 minute away now from the European close at 4:30 p.m. London time here. So just a bit of a catch up and a review on what's happened so far in the session. And I mean, first thing to say, it's been a relatively slow session. Would probably be an understatement. Certainly from a kind of news flow point of view, it's been fairly slow. I'm going to just pick out a couple of things. So firstly, if we have a look at the euro dollar here, then you can see it's kind of been generally, and this is a 60-minute chart, so I'm looking back across over the last few sessions, and we had this upside on Friday as a result of dollar weakness, but actually we've had kind of had a day of two halves, I would say. I'm going to come back to this 1 hour chart in a minute. So if we look on a 10-minute, then what we've got is kind of in a way a day of two halves, in that the first half of the day this exchange rate was drifting to the downside, and this culminated in the low of the session so far, at least, being printed here just after the European Open. This was more dollar strength pushing this exchange rate lower. No news driving that, just more of a retracement of the big moves to the upside that we saw last week. But then we saw things turn and drift back higher, and then around 10 a.m. we got our first kind of data point of the session, and the data point was inflation news. This is inflation for the month of June for Europe. I'm going to show you the chart here, although I have to say Trading Economics have not updated this. So the right hand bar here shows June annualized core inflation, and it actually got revised up to 1.2, so this chart's inaccurate. So 1.2% was the reading, so matching that print we had back in April, so matching the highest core inflation readings we've seen since 2015. Okay, so inflation slightly higher than expected, which has led to the euro generally being pretty strong. Really from that 8 a.m. low, we currently just kind of topped out this little blip higher here. We've topped out so far at 115.25 before pulling back down towards the 115 handle. So bit of downside to start with on this exchange rate, and then from about 9 a.m. this exchange rate's generally been pushing back up. I'll go to the 60-minute now just to bring in, actually I'm going to go to 120 minutes just to show you that we didn't quite make it to the high that we saw last week. So last week's high on euro dollar, which will be key resistance, we didn't quite make it, 115.30. So we actually got a reversal from there about 5 pips before we hit it, and that reversal's been pretty solid. So we dropped back towards the 115 handle. So in the end, so far kind of flat, but certainly some two-way movement here, and that inflation number off out of Europe important. Elsewhere then, I mean, it's quite similar for the DAX in many ways. So European equities started the session back at 7 a.m. very strong, but then tracked quite aggressively lower. We tracked down and hit S2 support, but that was also, if I go to a 60-minute chart, that was the key top that we had back on the 11th of July here. So, you know, nice technically, that low for today, at least so far, being defined by that double support S1, but then also this high point that we had back on the 11th. Since then, we bounced. If I go zoom back into like a 5-minute chart, we bounced, we found resistance at the pivot, and then we've been consolidating in the middle of that range for the last few hours as news flows kind of quietened off. With US equities, I'll show you the S&P because we had a little bit of some downside. I'm just going to remove some of these lines. Let's just remove these lines and start again. We had a little bit of downside here after some data at 1:30. If I show you the chart, what happened was we had some New York State sort of empire manufacturing data which missed expectations and came in at 9.8, as you can see on the chart here. So, you know, dropping to half of what it was the month before, although that month before, 19.8, was a 3-year high. So a bit of US data there which disappointed. And so if I transition back to the chart, we had that bit of downside, and around about 10 minutes after the US cash open, we kind of bottomed out back on the low that we had seen earlier on this morning. That's where we've seen the reversal, and now US equities have drifted back higher, although I will say this is a very tight range today. And in the grand scheme of things, if I go to a daily chart, now this is a very tight range right at the top portion of Friday's rally, and this is a key range right up at all-time ever highs, of course, because Friday's session took this index back to a new all-time high. So quite a quiet session of consolidation so far. US equities happy to stay right up here on the top, despite that weaker than expected data. Let's have a look at crude oil. It's been a bit of a mess so far, really choppy. I'd say very difficult to kind of gauge direction today. Again, some of that is because there's been a lack of news flow, but just as I speak, we're getting crude oil to trade down and test the low of the day. 46.26 was the low point that we saw put in place 1:45 p.m. London time. So you're just getting, there you go, oil as I speak, new low for the session. So you're just getting a technical move lower. We don't have any news flow on this, so this isn't fundamentally driven. Just a bit of price action taking us down through the lows. And if I go to a 60-minute chart, you'll see this is a decent technical level, decent, no more than decent. I picked this out because it was the high when we had a pretty strong rally on Thursday's session. And so now it comes in as support. The reason why I say it's only decent is because on Friday we chopped through this price quite a few times, which weakens it. But that's where we formed a bottom 3 hours back, and we're just having a go at taking that out. But as you can see, this movement here today is also quite relatively subdued, and we're trading up at the top of that rally we had towards the end of last week. Okay, so a little bit of price action here on crude. Otherwise, it's been a decent day for gold, although it's pulled back a touch now, but gold probably one of the outstanding performers of all. A key break up above the overnight highs. This came around about, well, just after midday, and we broke higher here, and just been consolidating that. And as we see on the daily chart, this is kind of continuing the bounce that we've seen now over the last 7 sessions now, where this gold price has been trying to march higher. Big up day Friday, and we're just adding to that today. So, but of course, we're still down at the bottom of ultimately what was a monster sell-off through the month of June. So that's it for now. As I said, quite a quiet session. We've still got some earnings out of the US. After the US close tonight, we'll have Netflix delivering their earnings report. And certainly tomorrow's session is looking more interesting from an economic data perspective, where we've got the lights, but the highlight will certainly be actually here in the UK inflation data being announced. That'll be 9:30 a.m. London time, but then Mark Carney's talking in the afternoon, so we'll be certainly covering that in detail. It could well produce some of the more interesting moves. And so, of course, sterling versus the dollar and sterling versus other currencies will be main focus. Just looking at that right now, we're right down on the lows. You can see this blue line, which is the pivot level. If I went to a longer term 60-minute chart, you'll see that whilst we've been drifting lower all day, we're still up at the top of what was a pretty explosive move to the upside on Friday, as we broke up through the 130 handle, of course, and traded right up above the 131 handle, and the high this morning, or sorry, I should say Friday night, and then this morning 131.41. And again, if you look at that on a longer time frame, that's pretty key, because that move on Friday and the start of today's session was a new, let me just see, that's the highest we'd been since September last year. So what is that? That's a 9-month high here for cable. But today's session has been If I go back to the daily, red all the way, not aggressively selling off, but certainly steady progress on the downside. Do bear in mind, if this downside does continue, got a very important price point. 130.61 was the double top, the May high, and then again the June high. That got smashed on Friday. But what was key resistance, of course, turns into key support. And so just bear in mind, that might be not necessarily for today, although we're only 20 pips off that price. But maybe not today or tomorrow, that price point might come into play. That's certainly an important one to be aware of, 130.61 on the futures. Okay, that's it for now on the European market wrap. Enjoy the rest of the session if you're trading into the US close, and for the rest of you that are finishing here at the European close, we will catch up for the market briefing first thing tomorrow morning. Thanks.